It happens in a matter of seconds. A set of flashing lights appears in your rearview mirror. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel. Your mind starts racing. What did I do? What am I supposed to say? What if I say the wrong thing? Now let me ask you something. If a police officer walks up to your window right now and starts asking questions, would you know exactly what your legal rights are? And more importantly, what rule quietly protects you in that moment? Think about it, and if you're not completely sure, drop your answer in the comments, because by the end of this, you might see that situation very differently, because there is a legal principle, simple, powerful, and often misunderstood, that stands between ordinary drivers and potential legal trouble. And most people don't even realize when it's protecting them, or when they accidentally give it away. Picture a quiet road late at night. A driver is heading home, maybe a little tired, maybe distracted. Suddenly, red and blue lights fill the car. The driver pulls over. The officer approaches, calm but observant, and asks a routine question. Do you know why I stopped you? It sounds harmless, almost conversational, but in that moment something important is happening, not just socially, but legally, because the law treats that interaction as more than just a conversation. It becomes a structured encounter governed by constitutional protections, legal standards, and decades of court decisions that define exactly what the police can do and what you are not required to do. At the center of all this is a foundational rule, the requirement that police must have a lawful basis to stop you, and the equally important principle that you are not obligated to incriminate yourself during that stop. That might sound straightforward, but the reality is far more nuanced. Let's slow this down and unpack what's actually happening when a vehicle is pulled over. A traffic stop is considered a seizure under the law. That doesn't mean something dramatic like being arrested. It simply means your freedom of movement is temporarily restricted. You are not free to leave until the officer says so. Because of that, the law requires that the officer must have a valid reason to initiate the stop. This is commonly referred to as reasonable suspicion, or in many cases, probable cause, if a traffic violation is clearly observed. This could be something as simple as speeding, a broken taillight, or failing to signal. But it cannot be arbitrary. The officer cannot just pull you over because they feel like it. Now here's where the protective rule begins to show its power. Once the stop is initiated, the officer is allowed to ask for certain documents, typically your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. These are considered standard requirements for operating a vehicle, but beyond that, the situation becomes more complex. When the officer starts asking questions, where are you coming from? Have you been drinking? Do you know how fast you were going? Many people instinctively respond. It feels natural, it feels expected, but legally, something critical is at play here. You have the right not to answer questions that could potentially incriminate you. This right is rooted in a broader legal principle often associated with the protection against self-incrimination. While many people associate it only with arrests or courtroom situations, it actually applies during police encounters as well. And this is where the legal rule that protects drivers becomes quietly powerful. Because the law does not require you to build a case against yourself. Think about that for a moment. How many times have people answered a simple question like, do you know how fast you were going? With something like, yeah, maybe a little over the limit. That statement, made casually and without pressure, can later be used as evidence, not because it was forced, but because it was volunteered. And that's the key distinction. The law protects you from being compelled to incriminate yourself, but it does not protect you from what you choose to say freely. Let's consider a real-world example. There have been numerous court cases where drivers challenged traffic stops or charges, and one of the central questions became whether the evidence against them came from lawful observation or from their own statements. In many of these cases, the driver's own words played a significant role. A simple admission made in the moment became part of the legal record. Now ask yourself, in a high-pressure situation, would you carefully choose your words, or would you just respond automatically? This is where awareness becomes everything. Because the protective rule isn't something dramatic or obvious. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stop the officer from asking questions. It simply exists in the background, giving you a choice to speak or not, and that choice can have consequences. Now, it's important to understand something clearly. Exercising your rights does not mean being disrespectful or confrontational. In fact, the law expects cooperation in certain areas, providing identification, following lawful instructions, and maintaining a safe interaction. But cooperation does not mean surrendering your rights. You can be polite, calm, and respectful, while also being mindful of what you say. For example, instead of answering every question in detail, some legal experts suggest that drivers can respond with neutral statements like, "I prefer not to answer any questions." This is not an act of defiance. It is a lawful exercise of a protected right. And yet many people hesitate to do this. Why? Because there is a natural psychological pressure during police encounters, the authority of the situation, the presence of law enforcement, and the desire to appear cooperative all influence behavior. People often believe that explaining themselves will help, that if they just clarify the situation, things will go smoother. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes those explanations create unintended legal consequences, and this is where the deeper layer of the legal rule becomes clear. The law is not just about what is fair, it is about what can be proven. And in many cases, the strongest evidence doesn't come from complex investigations. It comes from simple statements made in ordinary moments. Now let's take a step further. Another key aspect of the protection during traffic stops is the limitation on how long the stop can last. Courts have consistently ruled that a traffic stop must be reasonably related in duration to the reason for the stop. In simple terms, the officer cannot extend the stop unnecessarily without a valid reason. If you were stopped for a minor traffic violation, the interaction should not turn into a prolonged investigation unless additional factors arise that justify it. This principle was reinforced in multiple court decisions where extended stops without proper justification were found to violate legal protections. So again, there is a balance. Law enforcement has the authority to enforce traffic laws and ensure safety, but that authority is not unlimited. And the law draws boundaries, clear defined boundaries around what is permissible. Now let me ask you something else. If a stop begins as a routine check but gradually turns into a series of probing questions, would you recognize when that shift happens? Most people wouldn't, because it doesn't feel like a shift. It feels like a conversation. And that's what makes it so effective and so misunderstood. The legal system, however, sees it differently. It examines whether each step of the interaction was justified, whether the driver's rights were respected, and whether any evidence obtained was lawful. And this is where the protective rule continues to operate quietly. It doesn't prevent the interaction. It doesn't stop questions from being asked, but it ensures that you are not required to provide answers that could be used against you. Now, there's another layer to this that often goes unnoticed: consent. During a traffic stop, an officer may ask for permission to search your vehicle, and the way that question is framed can sound very casual. Do you mind if I take a look inside? Many people say yes without thinking twice, but legally, that consent changes everything. Because once you give permission, the search becomes lawful, even if the officer did not have independent grounds to conduct it. And just like with statements, the law does not protect you from what you voluntarily agree to. So again, the protective rule is there, but it depends on your awareness. Now, this doesn't mean refusing everything or creating tension. It simply means understanding that you have a choice. You can respectfully decline, you can remain calm, you can comply with lawful requirements while still preserving your rights, and that balance is what the law is designed to maintain. Throughout history, courts have emphasized the importance of this balance. The goal is not to hinder law enforcement, but to ensure that power is exercised within legal limits, because without those limits, the system would lose its fairness. And without awareness, individuals can unknowingly step outside the protection those limits provide. So as you think about all of this, consider your own experiences. Have you ever been pulled over and felt unsure about what to say? Have you ever answered a question just because it felt expected? Have you ever agreed to something simply because it seemed easier in the moment? If so, you're not alone. These situations are common, and they reveal something important about human behavior under pressure. But they also reveal something about the law. The protections are there. They are real. They are established through decades of legal development and judicial interpretation, but they are not automatic. They depend on awareness. They depend on choices made in real time. And that's what makes this rule so powerful and so easy to overlook. Because it doesn't look like protection. It looks like silence. It looks like restraint. It looks like a simple decision not to say more than necessary. And yet that decision can shape the entire outcome of an interaction. As we come to the end of this, take a moment to reflect. The next time you see flashing lights in your mirror, what will you do? Will you speak freely without thinking? Will you assume you have to answer everything? Or will you remember that the law gives you a quiet, powerful form of protection, one that doesn't require confrontation, only awareness? The legal system is built on rules, but it is also built on choices. And in those brief moments on the side of the road, those choices matter more than most people realize. So what do you think? Do you believe most drivers understand their rights during police stops, or are they unknowingly giving them away? Share your thoughts in the comments because the conversation around this topic is just as important as the rule itself.